right. Oh, yes, we see who's here in the house here this morning. This is none other than a true legend, an intellectual warrior, freedom fighter, a lawyer, scholar, one of the true change agents of our era. This is none other than Dr. Mary Frances Berry. For many years, the Geraldine Siegel Professor of American Social Thought, Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. Did her PhD at the University of Michigan, go Wolverines, and also got a JD from there. Um, so many things we could say about you, Dr. Berry, but I'll just pick a couple of things and maybe we'll talk about some more over the arc of our short time together. From 1980 to 2004, was a member of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, chaired that commission from 1993 to 2004, has worked as provost at the University of Maryland, and became the first woman to head a major research university as chancellor of the University of Colorado at Boulder. The author of 13 books and counting. We're waiting on her next book in January of 2025. We may have talked up another book project for you in terms of talking about your time in Egypt, Dr. Berry. And of course, it's an honor for us to be with you, fellow Nashvilleian, and go Bulldogs. So we gotta shout out Fisk University.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is a site that I've done many times in the past with Joe Madison.
We are, well, listen,
right.
Honor. It's an honor.
Sweet brother. Yes.
Joe continues to light the path for us, and we're grateful that when he makes the call, albeit through his progeny, who he lit the torches for, that his the members of his expansive freedom fighting family do answer the call. So we're grateful for you answering the call for us.
Absolutely.
Dr. Berry, I'm gonna ask a quick question just to start out, and Lamont and I will just kind of go back and forth. Having taught your book for many years, back when I was in grad school at Ohio State, and then ultimately Howard, Long Memory, the book you did with John Blassingame, one of your early books, and then following your scholarship all the way through, your legal scholarship, Black Resistance, White Law, your scholarship in the relationship between social justice, the law, and politics, and using people's stories like the pig farmer, when you wrote that book on American justice. But you have dialed in very seriously over the arc of the last, let's say, couple of decades on the question of reparations. As I said before we started here now, before we went live, we had about 220 Philadelphia Freedom School students read your book, My Face is Black is True, about your homie, the great Callie House. But since then, you have been on a tear, including this new book, this new anthology on reparations. Do you mind telling us a little bit about why reparations has so kind of troubled your spirit and led you to focus on helping us advance this reparation movement?
Well, one point is that my legal scholarship and being a lawyer and all that, as well as a historian, led me to understand that all of these proposals that we make, and I remember when Coretta told me that Martin finally they got together the Poor People's Campaign because they thought that after they got the right to vote in the Voting Rights Act, that they wouldn't have to be on the streets. As Andy used to say, we don't have to be on the streets, we can be in the suites. But that after he saw that nothing happened, that poverty was still there, all these problems, and he would go around and talk to Black people in cities, LA, Chicago, and they would say, man, you did all that, and look at this. We got asbestos and whatever, and the roaches, and we got this and all these problems. So what are you going to do about this, poverty? That's why he wrote the last book that he wrote, Where Do We Go From Here? And said you had to combine resistance, not direct action, with voting, okay? And so I have been on a tear for years to try to Black people understand that what you need to do is vote. Sure, we fought for that, we want to do that, that's what you do. But that our history teaches us that if you want something to happen, you have to be activists about it. And somebody, as Jimmy Baldwin used to tell us, has to go through the fire each time. Okay. And somebody's got to stand up and go through the fire. And so I've been on telling people that you can't get reparations. I said that before they attacked DEI. that you can't get reparations unless you do something besides having meetings and convocations and talking to people and thinking they're going to believe for this reason or other they ought to do it. And so I'm for direct action, which is why I wrote the book I wrote, where I say history teaches us to resist, and a coda of that on the legal side. I have been worrying people to death lately by saying that I'm sick of y'all telling me that there's another DEI case in the law where people are attacking us. They're attacking Northwestern for having reparations. They're attacking these things around the country. We need a grand strategy. And our grand strategy ought to be to propose that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were upheld in the Slaughterhouse cases in 1873, which nobody ever heard of Slaughterhouse cases except me and about five other people. In which the Supreme Court said that the one prevailing purpose of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were to elevate the status of the former slaves. That was the one. Did you get that word? Prevailing purpose.
Prevailing.
The court in a majority decision upheld that. Mr. Justice Miller wrote the opinion. But as soon as Miller was no longer around, the minority in that case reinterpreted it that the 14th Amendment, equal protection and due process, is not about Black people. It's not about Negroes. It's about corporations.
Yes,
and it's to protect corporations from regulation, from all kinds of stuff. And then I could go all through the cases, we don't have time. But the 1883 civil rights cases in which Mr. Justice Bradley said the Negro thinks he's the lady of the races because now that he's free, we ought to give him all this protection. But once you're freed, you're on your own. You're on your own. So don't come in here telling us about, non-discrimination because of the 14th Amendment and so on. That's all about corporations. That's to protect corporations. And the knowledge has come down and the misinterpretation to this day, while we're sitting there talking, that most people believe that the 14th Amendment was designed to protect corporations. Corporations believe it. They bring lawsuits all the time against government regulation, against anything that's done to them, say that their due process and their equal protection is violated. White people bring cases saying that if you give anything to the Negro, you therefore discriminate against us. We've seen it in the Harvard case, the North Carolina case, other groups do that. It's happening the case where you can't even give money to Black women who want to be business people, even if it's your own money, unless you give some more. The Black farmers not getting the money that they sued for, and I helped them by doing reports and doing all kinds of stuff to get, where the white farmer sued them. And so now they get some money, but not that money, and only part of it, because the white farmers get part of it. So all of that, and the argument is that the 14th Amendment, when they go into court with these cases, they say that the 14th Amendment provides equal protection for us, and originally it was for corporations. And I've been trying to get somebody to see that unless we can get a reinterpretation to take up that case, the case I told you about, Slaughterhouse, has never been overruled.
No.
It's just lying there dormant with nobody doing anything about it. And my students who come to me, law students, history students, tell me they never heard of it. Nobody ever told them anything. The people at the Legal Defense Fund told me they'd never heard of it.
No.
I knew anything about this case, that it had anything. And then they knew that there was something in there about privileges and immunities, that you only had one to march to the Capitol or do certain things. And they would have been trying to think about how to broaden that, but they have missed the boat entirely. I don't mean in particular people, but just nobody paid attention. Nobody knew. So here's what we got to do. We got all the other work to do on reparations. We have got to, if you can't get affirmative action, you can't get DEI, you can't get any money, even if it's your money. If you can't, all these things you can't do, because you let people keep saying that the 14th Amendment isn't about giving you equal protection. It's about all these other people and being fair to everybody in corporations. Then, in fact, we will never get reparations, as a principle, and that ought to be added. Now, I did the kids who were apprentices, whose parents had to fight to try to get them back. Some of them got them back. A whole lot just never got them back.
Mm.
I did it because Sandy Darity, who's an economist, is my good friend down at Duke and has been for years, had me working with some of his people during the when we had the pandemic on Zoom about once a week. We were all talking. And I asked if anybody knew about these kids. Nobody had heard of that either.
Mm.
That's why I did the book. And I not only did the book, got some people who won their cases and got in court, other people who didn't and stayed as slaves. And I traced the families all the way to the late 20th century so that we can tell the deprivation, what happened to Black people all that time. And that is an additional part of the case for reparations. That's a long-winded thing, but that's it.
Oh, no, first of all, we'll have to have you back because I am shocked. When I went to law school, we did slaughterhouse cases, and I teach a class at Howard Law School. We do slaughterhouse. How in the heck are they leaving out these Louisiana butchers in law schools? I am astounded at that. First of all,
Right.
but and we see Ketanji Brown Jackson, of course. They want to talk about strict constructionists. They're not going back to what the courts have said. They're not going back to the documents. But then that's a question for another day. What are they teaching in law schools that they're not doing the slaughterhouse case anymore? But how much of your vision, and in this new book, you have put together quite the anthology with my friend Sundiata Chajiwa and our brother VP Franklin to cover the full spectrum, including the Caribbean. We see Hillary McBeckles there, who, of course, they know apprenticeship well in the Caribbean, as you know better than I do. But in terms of a global strategy and how U.S. law intersects with that, have you seen anything in the early opinions of Ketanji Brown Jackson that gives you hope that perhaps some return to the 19th Amendment, to what your colleague at Penn, I think, Kermit Roosevelt, calls that kind of real American founding in the 19th century, that Reconstruction Constitution? Any hope that there may be a return to that type of jurisprudence, which really is true to the Civil War amendments?
What Ketanji Brown Jackson does in the Harvard case, or she and North Carolina cases. I guess she did North Carolina because she had to recuse herself because of Harvard.
Mhm.
But what she does is she doesn't, of course, cite slaughterhouse or anything, but she's familiar with the history and why race has to be taken into account and why Black people are supposed to be the beneficiaries of trying to become not better than everybody, but just elevated out of inequality and slavery up. And every time somebody comes up with something, it's to beat us back again. She knows that. So if you had more people like her, I quote some of her stuff in this book, this latest, the one on that after slavery, and the book that I did with Sundiata and BP has in a form that people can read all the important things that different people, whether it was in the Caribbean or Africa, whatever it is, said on the reparations question. It's all there. We got people to let us use all their stuff and all the rest of it and put it there so that somebody, if you didn't know anything, you could have some grounding, as they say, in what this whole thing is about. So what we need is more Ketanji Brown Jackson, people like her. Now, Clarence Thomas, interestingly enough, says he is an originalist.
Right.
Now, if Clarence Thomas is an originalist, he ought to be with the deal on the one prevailing purpose under the slaughterhouse definition, which is still good law, which nobody ever presents to them, so they don't have to even consider it. And what's going on there?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we often talk about on our program, well, I specifically about where are the brightest minds among us? Where are these legal minds to kind of get in the game and use the same legalese, the same legal loopholes that they're using against us back at them? And so I kind of hear in your previous explanation that that's kind of missing, whereas there are elements to the law that aren't being pursued, being flushed out on our end to use in our defense. So, firstly, I can appreciate that perspective. Secondly, to one of your previous points when you first came on about activism and voting, like there's no separation between, voting and then direct action. So my question to you is, when I was young, uh, when I was so-called radical, so-called revolutionary, in my own head, I used to love the phrase, Black people are not a monolith, because I really thought at the time when I learned it and understood its meaning at its core, I thought that was a profound position to take and a big thing to say. As I got older and kind of my mentality evolved, my question to you is, do you think Black people need to be a monolith in order to marry direct action with voting?
First of all, I think that Black people need to be a monolith when it comes to coming together
Mhm.
with other people who help us to try to advance our cause and to be very strong about that. Okay. I think we don't need to be a monolith in our thinking about strategy,
Mm.
because if you have people who come up with more strategy, like when I came up with the Callie House book and what she did about reparations way back, people didn't even believe me. They
Mm.
said it couldn't be some Black woman who started all that. Where'd you get that, cockamamie thing from? And they gonna believe that. And whatever. Well, we don't want to hear that. And so that's why people don't want to hear it. And besides, she was a woman. How in the world could she, no Black woman could go and do something like that? You don't know what you're talking about. So we need to be open-minded in developing strategy.
Mm.
Don't come in the room with, oh, we're going to do this. And then we don't have to worry about that. I was with some people who said, what we should do is persuade all the people who don't agree that Black people should have reparations, that we should, by telling them stories that will break their hearts
Mm.
about bad things that have happened to us. I said, well, I believe in telling about the bad things that have happened to us to get the record straight, but they're going to come back to you with something else, like my
Mm.
daddy didn't have any slaves or whatever it is. Or if Sandy will do his book, he and his Kristen, on the wealth gap, and people see that there's a wealth gap, then they'll say Black people should have reparations. I said, the work ought to be done, but when you do that work, what they're going to do is fund a group of people, which they've done up at Harvard now. There's some scholars, and they've got one as a young guy, the blackface in high place.
Yes.
And they are proving that class is more important than race.
Mm.
And therefore, poor white people are doing worse than Black people. And if you have a community with people who are strong and who see the future in terms of progress and so on, you can progress no matter what. And I read the thing, and that's supposed to be a rebuttal to, without saying so, to the idea that we need to worry about the wealth gap. I said to myself, well, if you really believe that, what you need to do is give us some resources so we can all have a community that will, in fact, have the kind of empowerment and progress and opportunity so that people can do this. But that's missing. So my answer to you is that we should be a monolith in terms of struggling for our freedom and believing in it. But if I was sitting down with Clarence Thomas, I'd say, man, you were supposed to be an originalist. Just the thing I just told you. Damn originalist. How come you're not, looking at this and see what he, had to say? Now, the Supreme Court could do what I'm saying and then overturn it and say, oh, that's been around all these years.
Mm.
We didn't really mean that. But then they'd have to come out of hiding and they would have to be straight up. And maybe even some of our people don't seem to understand anything. And I understand what you mean by being young and being a revolutionary. When I was young, I thought I was a revolutionary. And then I decided, since I'm older now, that I really am a revolutionary.
Yeah, I know that's right. Yeah.
Dr. Perry, it's interesting, given this Dred Scott thing that you've responded to, but thinking about the separation between the federal government, the state governments, I'm thinking about your colleague, one longtime colleague now, an ancestor, Derek Bell, talking about the permanence of racism. How much of this is about the lack to date of a national will, of a national identity to commit to everyone in this project called United States, sharing fully in the future of the country. And I'm thinking about this in terms of with your hat as a historian on, as you look through that long memory, as we talk about. How much of this is about a lack of commitment to everyone sharing in this? And when you mentioned slaughterhouse cases or the civil rights cases, and this distinction between the federal government role and the role of the states, is there a common American identity that can sustain the weight of a reparations demand? And if so, can American law, can U.S. law really be crafted to extricate what your friend Derek Bell at one time called the permanence of racism in this project?
Yeah, well, Derek was a pessimist because he had experience. This is with a bunch of black folk who, wanted school desegregation and thought that was going to be perfect. These people are desegregated schools and they'll give us everything we need. It'll be fine. And Derek said, that's not true. The history of this country shows that that is not true, the way the system is set up now. It is possible to have an American identity, which some people have tried to do, which is about equality. There's a sense in which right now, because they have a new, an indigenous person for the first time as Secretary of the Department of Interior, and who gets to pay attention to things that other people aren't noticing. There's been a great emphasis on trying to figure out a way to give land back, how to designate things, how to do all this stuff. But that took two things. One, it took the woman who was doing it being a righteous sister who didn't care what anybody did to her. You see, she was going behind the door, in front of the door, do some of this stuff before somebody stopped it. And it took a long struggle, as you know, from the indigenous people way back for this to happen. Too often, what we get, I've noticed, is that when we get people in politics and they are in a position, I went into politics for a while, running education, federal government, and all the rest of that, and took it only because I wanted to find out how these people managed to give money and resources to their folks, and I wanted to give some to mine. And I said, now, if I go over there and sit on this pot of money and figure out how they do it, from now on, and once I got over there, when our people came, Dorothy Height, I remember the first day she came, National Council of Negro Women, and I knew Dorothy all right, and she's my good Delta sister. And she said, I need for next year, and we sat there and we got some people and we wrote up a proposal. And but if I hadn't gone over there to find out what these people were doing and to do it legally, I wouldn't have been able to figure out, how to get this money out the door for all these people. One of our major problems with the ag department is we've never had anybody run the ag department so that they could tell us. We had, what's his name, from Mississippi that they accused of some kind of crime in the Clinton period. You know what I'm talking about. Which hadn't done anything. Huh?
Mike Epstein, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was trying to figure out how to do it, but they didn't want him to do it. So they got rid of him.
That's right.
Oh, what you got to have is somebody who can surreptitiously figure out what these people are doing. And then maybe that's one way. When you get inside, you're inside not to be a time server or to move upper. Like, what am I going to get the next thing? Most of the people I know are mover uppers. I'm going to do this now and I'm going to help with this. I know them. So I see them doing it. And then I'll go up here and I'll do this. And so what you got to have is somebody who is willing to take slings and arrows, who's willing to be stand up, and who doesn't care really what people say about him or anything else, and find a sneaky way, not overtly saying, I'm here to find out how you people do things, because I don't want to go and do. Nah, no, I'm just here to be nice and to see what's going on. Isn't that wonderful?
My final question for you is kind of a, I would love to hear your thought on a broader issue when we talk about reparations and restorative compensation and where the money will come from. And I've heard different notions. Of course, our government can print money whenever they want to. We could leverage, the $1 trillion debt, but I heard of an idea about setting up a trust right? Where the trust, you know, it could be enormous in nature. It could be funded by the insurance company that benefited from slavery. It could be by the top companies on the stock exchange that benefited and we created out of slavery. Whereas descendants of American slaves, or whatever category they may be classified as, would be paid dividends off of the interest. And where it is over time, it becomes self-sustaining and self-funded. Do you think from a practicality standpoint, something like that or similar to that could happen in real time?
That could happen. You know, the NACP has this thing they call the Black Super Fund, which would do something similar like that. But listen, the Justice Department has money in the civil division over there that when cases are won by plaintiffs or by justice, there are attorney's fees that are paid. And some of them are huge and they're put into a fund. And there are no restrictions on who that money can be given to. It doesn't say explicitly. Right now, whoever runs that part of the operation gives it to whatever nonprofits they feel like giving it to. Now, the story has been told some around in the media that this is going on, and somebody may try to put some restrictions on it or do something. But right now, because that's what people do, right? Right now, that money has been over there for. It's like when Callie House, who I wrote about, when she found out that there was all this cotton that the federal government had confiscated that belonged to the rebels, and it was just sitting there, and it needed to be sold for tax purposes, and that tax money was going to come to the federal government. She said, that's a fund. There are funds all around the government. If you look, you don't have to have any specific fund. You can look at all of those areas where there are attorney's fees, where there are taxes on contraband, stuff that came in without tariffs being paid, and other kinds of things. And lawyers who know how to do that side of things can figure out for you. But the main thing is you don't go around and tell everybody. I mean, I know you want people to listen to this program, but I hope nobody heard me say that. I should tell you all that. I should have written you a note. You can say, look, here's how you do this. And it's perfectly legal.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. And so there are ways for us to put pots of money together. Our major problem right now is what I was talking about earlier. We are being killed by 1,000 cuts with all these people arguing that the 14th Amendment, equal protection, doesn't apply to giving us any favor of anything. And therefore, that was the way it was intended. And then nobody really mounting the kind of resistance to that idea that ought to be made. So just arguing for reparations and not for being protective of even the principle.
Yeah.
The principle is at stake. Do you get that, my brother?
Yes.
The principle is at stake. And so I think we could find all kinds of ways. We got some smart folks in this country. We got some smart lawyers.
Yes.
They didn't all die, get killed, or go away. And so we can do that. But we first have to figure out a way to deal with this onslaught. Today, they said Ford Motor Company came out and said no more DEI. We got all these other companies also saying it. And then you got Black people saying, DEI, what is that? Why do we need that? You know, we don't need that. Do we need that? We have merit. I have people walk up in my face and say, I have merit. Yes. Also have Black people have a lack of resources.
Man. Well, we've taken up so much of your time today. We thank you for being so gracious.
Absolutely.
I almost feel like I hate to prevail upon you, but maybe we could squeeze one in, or maybe invite you to come back. And maybe next time you could talk more about this. We didn't get a chance to talk about any of the commissions. I see you have a couple of the commissioners from the various states and local reparations efforts in the new anthology. Those who testified, I know your friend Sandy Darity testified. I testified as well before the California Reparations Commission. And Dean Chemerinsky.
I did too.
No, you did. No question. You did, joined you in that work. Dean Chemerinsky tried to tell the commissioners, and you probably remember this, that lineage probably is going to be used as a proxy for race when the judicial challenge comes. I don't know if you have any thoughts about and here, of course, you advocate for full spectrum reparations. Let's try everything. Let's any questions on, any thoughts on restricting reparations in the United States to those who can be traced to have been descended from captivity here? And maybe that's a question for next time, but I don't know if that's something you have a quick.
I can do it real fast, and then we can talk about it the
Yes,
next time we talk about the other books.
Yes, ma'am.
If not before. The DOS, the ADOS argument, descendants of African American slave argument as a restriction. If the federal government is being asked to provide reparative justice for funds and resources, is a better argument. If the state is doing it, the state can do whatever they want to do. And they should cover, on principle, I think everybody should be covered. I'm always for everybody getting everything.
Yes, ma'am.
But if it's the feds, the way the federal government handles things, and you're saying it's a federal responsibility, then you have to argue that the federal government was responsible for the harm, or in some way privy to the harm. We know that that is the case. We have evidence that that is the case. But you have to do that in order to, say that the dollars were taken out, unless it's in a fund like the one I was talking about earlier, where it doesn't say what you can do with the money. You could give it to different groups or whatever. So you'd have to parse it out, but you'd be on less contentious ground if for the federal government, you said way back from the beginning, we can trace it all the way back to the colonial period, all the way up. ADOS have to, you say that you harmed them. But I think the state of California took the broader view. Other places should take the view of whoever is where they are, or whoever's been wherever they are that they think, and they shouldn't have any kind of restrictions.
Yes, ma'am. Well, this was extremely, extremely illuminating, and I know our listeners are going to appreciate it. Yeah. So we'll invite you back soon. We definitely want to hear about the new book coming out in January. If folks haven't picked up Reparations and Reparatory Justice, Past, Present, and Future, please do so. A very important anthology. And when you come back, and maybe even beyond that, we'll have regular conversations, because we definitely want to hear about the Free South Africa movement, your time, as you mentioned, with the Department of Education and Health and Welfare there in the United States government, and so many other things. The legendary Mary Frances Berry. Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Bye.